Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am very pleased to welcome you to a two-week series with our guest today. We're going to discuss some general questions and ideas about the Middle East. On the second program, we're going to concentrate on one of the particular countries, Saudi Arabia. I welcome to the program Dr. Charles J. Klock, Jr. We're very fortunate to have him here. He had many years' experience in the Middle East. Our distinguished guest holds a baccalaureate degree and a master's degree in the field of psychology. Both of those degrees are from San Jose State University, and he holds a Doctor of Education in the field of educational evaluation from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Our guest presently is the president of a management and educational consultant, and he's self-employed in that capacity. From 1981 until 1994, he was management advisor to the Saudi Arabian Oil Company, and as I've indicated, spent 13 years in that country and is knowledgeable about both that country and activities in the Middle East. And that area of the world is always of great interest and is certainly in the news concerning political activity almost all the time. Dr. Klock, welcome to the program. We're so pleased to have you here.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being so generous with your time both this week and next week. And as always, I'm very pleased to have a regular panelist, Janelle Berg, who will commence today's questioning.
Dr. Klock, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we're going to talk about a very important subject, one that a lot of people have on their minds right now. In particular, we're talking about the Middle East, and not everyone has the same vision of what constitutes the Middle East. Can you define the Middle East as you see it?
As I see it, the Middle East are those countries that border kind of the eastern side of the Mediterranean. The countries of Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, the northern part of Africa in some ways falls into that category. Certainly Saudi Arabia and the countries around Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, and Iran is considered by many people to be a Middle Eastern country, and in a sense it is, but it is not Arabic. Iran is actually a Persian country, and these are Persians that live there. A lot of people don't understand that, but it makes a huge difference to the Arabs. They don't see them as Arabs as such.
And what about Iraq?
Oh, and definitely Iraq.
We used to say that some people see them in different ways. What are some of the other countries, differences between the countries? They're not all a homogeneous area.
Oh, no. I don't think you'll find any of the two countries to be alike, except maybe in topography. There are many, many differences in the way the different Arabs in the different states think and operate and function. They have different habits, different styles. You can tell that very easily by moving from one country to another. There is a difference in the countries.
And Afghanistan we didn't talk about, but you'd put it in the Middle East as well?
I wouldn't personally, but it could be considered part of the Middle East by some, yes.
So in terms of geography, you are defining a very narrow area.
Very
really.
Narrow area. Mm-hmm.
And these people who live there are not all alike either.
No.
Certainly in beliefs they're not all alike.
They're not alike in beliefs, and they're not alike ethnically in many ways. For example, Yemen is a country that is composed largely of many, many nationalities. Many Africans have been through that country in their travels, as well as people from the Far East. So you have quite a blend of nationalities in Yemen. Also in Oman, you have quite a blend of nationalities. And to some degree in Saudi Arabia, you do too.
For the experienced traveler, the person who has been to these countries a number of times, can you distinguish between citizens of one country and citizens of another country by looking at them?
No. It would be very hard to do. Very hard to do.
Let's take this a little bit further, and Janelle's done a very fine job of making those distinctions through her questions. Give us some more explanation to our viewers who are not familiar with the Middle East, the difference between, like in Iran, with a Persian history and a Persian background, compared or contrasted with the Arabic? What are some of the, I know that from some individuals that I have talked with from the areas, they want to make that distinction very, very clear. So would you share with our viewers, to assist them if they may know people in this country from the Middle East or will travel there in the future, what are some of the contrasts between those two identifications?
That would be a hard thing to define. There is one major contrast, is that some of the Arabic nations are more of one type of Islamic religion than another. For example, Iraq has got many Shiites. Saudi Arabia is primarily Sunni, but there are also a lot of Shiites that live there. Iran has a good number of Shiite Muslims. It would be hard to differentiate, to be able to know how you would say one particular country might appeal to someone versus another. It's just kind of your own personal experiences. Some are much more rigid in their beliefs and much more rigid in their customs than others.
So one of the contrasts that one's getting at is, though, even though the Islamic religion or faith may be very dominant in most of the areas that you're identifying, but there's very distinct differences in the interpretation of Islamic ideas from place to place. Also, would there be some differences, if you trace it historically speaking back for generations, that there's some other, in addition to the religious interpretations being different, some other cultural differences in how they trace their history and their roots, and therefore may affect even their cultural life, social issues?
I'm not so sure I could address that too definitively, because unless they get a lot of their cultural activities or feelings or thinking from another country. For example, the Omanis are quite different, but a lot of their culture is intermingled with Far East. Yemen, as I mentioned, is a lot of their culture comes from Africa. So you do have this inroad in there. But as far as their ability, recognizing any ability in how they function or interact with people, I don't think you would see that much.
I guess my next question, without asking any, real intricacies in the process, but if you look at the governmental structure of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Egypt, and all, they're really coming from, at this point, some very significant differences in not only how they organize politically speaking, but their contacts to other parts of the world are different. Is that beginning to, or the time you were there, she observing, is that beginning to impact the entire population of the country to the extent that they are isolated or are very much involved with international politics?
I think it does, from the standpoint that the oil-rich countries definitely have to maintain a relationship, not only within their country, but they have to retain it with people outside of their country. Saudi Arabia is a classic example of that. They're kind of walking a tightrope in many cases. Iraq may be doing the same thing, the way things are evolving. I would say if there's a difference in how they are functioning now or how they're evolving to function, if there is a difference, it has to do with the economy, and primarily with the oil aspect. There is an awful lot of oil in Iraq, and that's something that that they are trying to take advantage of. But it's kind of, they have to walk a very thin line in taking advantage of it, because they don't want to upset the apple cart with some of the other religious feelings in some of the other countries that aren't quite so well-rich.
I should tell our viewers that we're taping this program in mid-October, and so by the time it airs, there could certainly be some changes in the Middle East. So if we don't discuss certain things that's going on, it's because it wasn't going on at the time we taped the program. Maybe I'll do one more series of questions and then go back to Chanel in relation to what we're talking about. It seems like that one of the most dominating aspects of the Middle East, as far as all aspects of their life, is religion. That it dominates the economics, the social, the political, all aspects. So is that to a much greater extent than it is in other parts of the world?
Yes. Oh yes, I think that's very true. And it also dominates their legal system. It dominates the way they function in terms of crime. One of the huge advantages that we had is that we just didn't have a crime problem where we were. And that's true in many of the other Arabic countries. Unless you happen to be in the line of fire when one group is after another, you're relatively safe.
I think that
the punishment is severe.
It is very severe.
If you try otherwise.
So in most of the countries, as they've applied their particular doctrine, certainly one cannot describe those governmental structures and political structures as democratic. That is, they do what we find so precious, our civil liberties, are certainly not guaranteed under their system, either of their governmental structure or their whole cultural history. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, let me take this a step further, because I think Americans certainly are very interested in this. One of the most horrendous things we've experienced in this country since World War II, and even then, there was the attack upon Pearl Harbor, but in the continental United States, we did not have to face, even in World War II, a direct attack. And with the awful crime in New York and Washington, D.C., with the terrorist planes going into the Pentagon and into the Twin Towers, we've begun to study more about what you're talking about, this differences and rift between different factions within the Islamic world. Am I correct to observe from that there is, in that world, as there is in some other worlds, a great struggle going on between what, for lack of a better term, we would call the moderates, or those who interpret the whole culture and religion in a moderate, peaceful way, versus the Osama bin Ladens, who have a totally different interpretation and really look upon people who don't agree with his particular interpretation as evil or Satan. So, from your experiences over time, is that a struggle going on in the Middle East? And that would be, if it is, a very crucial determination how that comes out.
Yes, yes, but that's been going on for centuries. And I don't really see where it's ever going to stop.
You mean these factions will continue to battle?
These factions will continue to battle. It's almost like you have two different religions. And here is where I think we've run into some problems in this country. We think of Islam as being, some people think of it as being intrinsically bad. It kind of determines on how it's being interpreted. And there are some people over there that interpret it quite differently than others. Basically, if you look at the principles of Islam, it's an extremely fair religion in many respects. But there are some people who do take advantage of it, just like there are some people in this country that take advantage of the Bible and interpret it to their own way, which is not necessarily what I think was intended originally.
So I was going to make that comparison. If you look at the history of the Christian movement in the world, and in Europe in particular, in the 100 years religious war, that those who have proclaimed Christianity as their faith and organized have not interpreted the same way, and some have interpreted from a viewpoint that is really major in contrast with others about where they're more one way or another in the approach to how their religion fits their life in that process. With that, we'll turn back to Janelle.
You are an educator, Dr. Klock, and I know you were very interested in education. You worked in education while you were in the Middle East. Tell us something about the educational process. Is there any standardization between the countries in the Middle East? That's one aspect of it. What kinds of education can people expect the average individual to attain during their lifetime?
If they live, I can't speak for all the countries in the Middle East, but certainly in the one that we were in, if you go to the local schools, the government schools, your religion is going to drive your educational program. That's consistent throughout the country, and I think to a great extent that's true in most of the other Muslim countries.
By that, just what do you mean? Your religion is going to how devout you are, or is it rather a matter of whether you are of the prevalent particular viewpoint of that area?
No, it's basically based upon the Quran. Your lessons are built around the Quran.
Okay. So that's the basis or the foundation for your education.
That's the basis. And of course the Arabs basically, in the long run, sort of got the whole concept of mathematics going, and that's a very strong program in the schools in the Arab nations.
So science is very important to them.
Science is extremely important. But the schools that we had in the company where we trained Saudis were more like schools in this country. You concentrated on the discipline, whatever it was, whether it be English, math, or science. And those were taught in Aramco.
And do a great number of people, young students from the Middle East, come to other countries, England, the continent, the U.S., for training?
Well, absolutely, yes.
And that's a desirable thing.
Yes, in fact, in some cases, there are families in some countries who will send their children to other countries because they want them to have a more well-rounded education. That happens.
About how far does a student go on the average? Is there any comparable grade level to ours?
Yes, they have a high school. They go through pretty much the same grade system we do in their local schools. Some people who live in Muslim countries, if they're Christian, for example, they will usually send their kids away to countries where you can get Christian schooling. That happens, for example, in Bahrain. Bahrain is a country that does have some Christian schools, so they can go there to get that.
Now, of course, an issue that I'm very interested in, what about women's education? Is there a difference between the way boys and girls are educated?
Yes, that would be true in most any of the countries in the Middle East, more so in some than others. However, women are getting educated. As you have seen in the press here, there are a series of situations even in some of the more severe countries where women are getting educated. They have to do it under wraps, but they do get it done. And the difficulty is, so once you educate the women, what are they going to do? Because
yes.
The job market isn't there.
And
so
that was going to be
my
next question was, the whole cultural thing is bound up in those differences. So now how does the education play into the culture in general?
It kind of depends on, I think, to a great extent, on the individual. And maybe we could get into more of that when we get into the Saudi Arabian aspect. But I do know, for example, a woman who is Saudi, who educated herself, and she is now the corporate executive officer or chief executive officer of her own company and doing extremely well. She does not wear the Arab dress. She wears an American business suit or Western business suit, and she is doing quite well. So it can happen. It's not impossible, but it's rare.
A little far afield, but if you would mind making a little bit another comparison in this whole process. If one looks at Indonesia and Pakistan and Afghanistan, and when the Taliban was in control, and at that point it's my understanding that, you know, with the struggle with the Soviet Union there and expelling the Soviet Union and the Northern Alliance in particular, that we helped in getting the Soviet Union out there. And of course then Pakistan was very involved with the Taliban taking control, and again there was a contrast what went on in Afghanistan compared to other countries while the Taliban was in control. So was that another faction or another form that was very similar to Osama bin Laden and how they dealt in controlling all of society?
I think so. The Muslims in the Far East that are now dominating some of the islands in the Far East, I can't really address where they're coming from. I think they're people who have a lot of poverty. Islam tends to appeal to people that fall into that category to some respect, just like Christianity does to some people too who are very poor. But they get a little bit carried away, and and they want to get more power than perhaps they realize they can get, so they do things they really shouldn't do. But that I don't know really how they're thinking and how they're operating.
If I can shift gears a little bit, before the program, you and I were talking about, historically, it's a fact that there's been turmoil in the Middle East for centuries. And with the reestablishing of Israel in the late 1940s, and certainly we have been a great ally of Israel, and it is a democratic country and democratic process. and certainly the parties are healthy and alive, and elections are held there on a regular basis. What do you see as the possible future between the Middle East and the countries that are certainly not in their structure having a democratic process compared with Israel? Is there any chance that a settlement can be made that, and our presidents have worked so hard on that, to where that there'll at least be a lessening of the tensions and conflicts between Israel and the other countries?
I don't think there will be in my lifetime, or probably anybody else's lifetime. But I think to understand that, you have to also understand or know how Israel was formed and what damage it did to the Palestinians and their state at that time, and the fact that the Palestinians are really struggling very hard to get some kind of a home base. And as long as they don't have it, I think there's always going to be this rift between the two. And personally, I realize that Israel is supposed to be more democratic, but I certainly wouldn't classify Israel as being democratic.
That statement confuses me because it seems to me, I guess we might respectfully disagree on that, because
yes, I'm sure that we might, and there are a lot of people that would disagree with me on that, but I don't see that. It's more democratic perhaps than some other countries I can think of, but to be truly democratic, I'm not sure.
Well, if you look at,
I'm not even sure we're truly democratic.
Okay, so now you've opened up the whole world of discussion democracy. But from the basis of the democratic process, you have a constitutional base in which the electorate is very powerful, and they have political parties, and they elect and determine the government, both legislative, executive, and so based upon that, I would take the position that
it meets that criteria.
It meets that criteria, and Israel could be a model for democracy in that area if others would be willing to view it. We'll drop it there and move on and go back.
There's too many things operating here, though, that's going to be messy on that score. To answer your question, I don't think there's ever going to be a happy ending on that one. I don't know how it's going to end up, but the signs just don't point to it. And history there's too much history here to mess it up.
Janelle Burke.
Well, we live in the great United States, and we're pleased and happy with our government here. In not with every aspect of it, but in general, we cannot imagine a country that would not want to have something similar to what we have here. But many people in the Middle East probably don't really want to be the same as us. And so what are the reasons that they would not want to be that way? What is the basis for their feeling that maybe they want to be the way they are, to have the kinds of governments they have?
That's the way they were brought up.
And they've accepted this.
And they've accepted it, and it's part of their religion. It's part of the way they feel. It's part of their upbringing, and anything else is heresy to even think about it.
And no doubt there are some economics in this whole thing playing into this. And what are the big economic forces?
Well, I think that depends on the country. Afghanistan, for example, didn't have really good economic base, and heaven knows when it will have. Countries like Saudi Arabia, or for that matter even Iraq, even though they claim they don't have anything, obviously that's not the case. Where oil is involved, these countries have a pretty solid economic base, or at least did have.
And does that drive their kind of government as well?
To some degree, it does, because obviously the Saudis are having to give quite a little bit in some of their previous beliefs in terms of being able to keep this relationship going with the West, and they want to keep that going now more than probably ever.
That's the balancing that you were talking about earlier. So that's one consideration, the economic consideration, which may make them temper a bit their government, or their type of government, or what their government does. What other kinds of things play into this whole idea of we like it the way we are?
I really think I've hit on it. I think it's primarily the way they've been brought up, the way they've been raised, and the fact that in places, in the countries where that's all they've known, and they're used to it, they don't really see a change. What is happening, though, I think that might change that a little bit, is that in the last 10, 20 years, there have been a lot of young people going out to other countries for education. Mm-hmm. Now, that's going to make, and already is making, a little bit of a difference. It's not that they're giving up their religion, but they're seeing things they've never seen before, and they're getting used to other ideologies which are kind of intriguing them. So I think that could make a difference, and I think it already has to some degree in some countries. A lot of the countries don't do that, though.
Let's talk a little bit about the urban versus the rural area. Most of those countries, as I understand, have some major large cities.
Yes.
But there are also a significant number of people who live in the countryside.
Yes.
And their standard of living and their type of living is quite different, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
And so what are some of the contrasts between these urban and rural dwellers?
Education. This is the major thing. They don't get much education. The families that live out in the desert and raise their kids like they did 4,000 years ago.
And they're very nomadic.
Yes. They move so they
from
can't
place.
really, there's no way. Their education is learning how to live the nomadic life.
And then their leadership is provided by tribal
Yes.
type
Usually.
individuals.
Yes, but, well, in the case of Saudi Arabia, if I can pick that one up for a minute, King Abdulaziz, when he took over control of the country, of the kingdom, was very smart in that he sort of married into many of the tribes. So he got them kind of thinking as a group. And this is one thing that was actually probably a pretty smart idea, because it's helped kind of unify a lot of the country in some respects.
On that note, Dr. Clark, we have to bring our program to conclusion, but the good news for our viewers is that you'll be back next week, and on that program we will talk about the country you spent 13 years in, Saudi Arabia, which Americans are very interested in what is happening there, and it was a base for us to work from during
a different world.
Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. So we will continue that next week. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed the program as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you, dealing with the issues in the Middle East. And as I've indicated, we'll be back next week to talk about Saudi Arabia, and I hope you'll be with us at that time for that discussion. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.